Watchmen. It's arguably the most influential graphic novel of all time. It was adapted into a big-budget live-action movie directed by Zack Snyder in 2009, and is set to get a two-part animated adaptation releasing sometime this year. As someone who's read the book cover to cover, I ask myself, why make a movie out of this? And before you go commenting, the obvious answer is money, of course. It's a recognizable brand, and it's guaranteed to bring in some big bucks for the powers that be. And by the way, I'm just going to flip through this book while I talk. But from a storytelling perspective, it's always been clear to me that Watchmen is made to be told as a comic. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with making a movie out of it, after all, they are different mediums, in my opinion, the comic will always be better. This won't be like an in-depth comparison between the Watchmen comic and movie, but rather just me pointing out the parts of the graphic novel to hopefully show you what I mean about Watchmen's comic format always being the superior method of telling the story. First of all, there's the politics of the story. Watchmen talks a lot about the geopolitical issues around the time the comic was published, from 1986 through 1987, including the Vietnam War and the threat of mutually assured destruction at the hands of nuclear weaponry. While these same issues are discussed in future adaptations of the story because it plays such a big role here, in my opinion it hits much closer to home because this story was actually created during that time. If you ask me, it's far more impactful reading a story about these issues during the time those issues took place, rather than engaging with the story about the issues decades after the fact. There's nothing wrong with issues long past being discussed in the future, but in this case I find the comic far more impactful for that reason. But Watchmen is also a superhero story, and not just a story about superheroes, but about superhero comics. And when this was released, it was one of the few comics to really take a crack at analyzing the reality of superheroes in a semi-real world setting, like the effects of their violent behaviors, vigilantism, disregard for law and order, and even their level of fascism. In our world today, when deconstruction of superhero genre is more than common, even when the first Watchmen movie released in 2009, I can't help but feel like adaptations of the story become trite when the ideas have already been discussed before. And look, you could say that about this video too, because I doubt I'm the only one who's talked about it, but that's besides the point. However, the original graphic novel is an artifact from its own time. When you read it, you understand the context in which it was written, and to me that overwrites any potential triteness, if that's even a word, by today's standards, because this wasn't written today. It's a superhero comic about superhero comics. Making it a movie just won't be as impactful for the same reasons a story written in the 80s about 80s politics will always be more impactful than the adaptation about 80s politics created decades after the fact. I hope this is all making sense. Now I just want to talk about some more specific stuff here. A big part of the comics, because they are a visual medium, is the use of color. Back when this story was written, many superhero comics used primary and secondary colors, but this story decided to focus on tertiary colors instead, making it visually stand out among many other superhero stories. When movies don't have that same kind of visual language that the comics did at this time, you don't get that visual distinction in the adaptation. It's a relatively smaller detail, but just another instance of the comic being able to do something that the movie can't. Another thing comics can do that movies can't do are panels. Like other superhero stories, Watchmen's pages are broken up into different panels of art. In many superhero stories, you have a variety of panel shapes and sizes, but Watchmen sticks primarily to a very uniform 3x3 structure with the occasional splash page. Sorry to get all English teachery for a moment, but this could be understood as a visual example of the differences in tone between Watchmen and other superhero stories. It trades the dynamic paneling you would expect for something very standardized, like implying the seriousness of the story, I don't know. Comic book structure also allows for storytelling moments that you can't do in movies, and I'll use Chapter 4, Watchmaker, as an example. Here we follow the naked blue guy, Dr. Manhattan, as he recounts his life up until this moment. But most important for us right now is the way he views time differently from everyone else. You see, Dr. Manhattan is able to view all events of the past, present, and future at once. Do you know what that means? It means he views his life like a comic book, the same way the reader has access to all the panels and pages of the story at once, jumping back and forth at their leisure. It's such a clever way of discussing point of view that you just can't do that in a linear movie. Finally, I wanted to briefly talk about the supplementary material. In pretty much every chapter of Watchmen, it includes a side story titled Tales of the Black Freighter, which is a comic within this comic mirroring the events of the story. And every chapter also concludes with additional media existing in-universe that explores the world of Watchmen far beyond the story itself. which includes chapters of the original Nite Owl's biography, various newspaper clippings, and part of an essay on Dr. Manhattan. It's not the most vital part of the story, but it's something that can be included here that can never be included in adaptations of the story due to pacing and the limited time frame. At the end of the day, I have nothing wrong with anybody enjoying the Watchmen movies. After all, it's your opinion and you're able to express that, but the way Watchmen is designed specifically for a graphic novel, I'll just never be able to get into these adaptations because I feel like I already have the best version of the story right here in my hands. If you've got your own thoughts on Watchmen and it's how the way that it's medium as a comic is important, let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know if you like the movies or dislike them or whatever. And I'll see y'all next time. Take care.